Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. Thanks to my sponsor this week, Scale Exercise Play Along Tracks. With me today is David William Hearn, here to talk all about StaffPad. We're going to be talking all about StaffPad today, an app that I'm pretty sure if you're a music educator or any musician and you have any awareness of iPad or iPadOS, you probably are aware of StaffPad. I figure it's worth just talking like upfront, like people always like to tell me they like to hear it get straight to the facts. Like what are the features, pricing, availability, we can get those stats out of the way and then maybe go into it more. I also kind of want to ask you then following that, like about your sort of journey, what's led you to be where you are, because I know that a lot of the later sort of technical decisions that have shaped what StaffPad is have a lot to do with like you've built StaffPad to solve a real problem for yourself. It's not like you were searching for an issue to solve and then fell into this. Like I know that you, like your own musicianship informs what it can and can't do. So can we cover some basics real quick for just because I know some music teachers probably have seen it on the App Store or maybe saw that it's won some awards. Congratulations, by the way, on the award and on the was it last WWDC? I can't remember time anymore.
Time stopped for me in March 2020 and never hasn't restarted yet. I think it was June 2020, so the year before we won the Apple Design Award, and we were featured in the iPad Pro launching in March 2021. And there's a few bits and bobs. We have a good relationship with Apple. They're really cool, and they like to show. I think what StaffPad does quite well is it shows a marriage of what the hardware and the software can do from a creative. If you put it into the hands of creative people, so Procreate is a great example on the art side, and I think StaffPad's quite an interesting tactile example on the music side because it's not just an application of well, I can I press certain buttons in a certain order and I'm going to get a certain result. It's not a computing app in that sense. It is more of an art app because it's heavily tied into Apple Pencil. It's heavily tied into, what you draw is what you hear. There's no real hiding or getting around it with some kind of magical keyboard shortcut or something, and that creates quite good demo. It looks quite good on camera. And ultimately it sounds good. If the guys who's using it is able to create, music with it, then that's a great showcase of what the iPad is capable of.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. This kind of speaks to, I'll just sneak it in here and maybe it'll just be a recurring theme if we want it to be. But like the iPad has certainly been something that for the people who demand the most from it, it's been something that's always leaving you with just like a little bit, I feel like real professionals are always just wanting a little bit more from it. Unless you have contextualized it as sort of like a thing that's very, very good at specific tasks. Like Apple Pencil is the first thing that comes to my mind. Maybe like the form factor of it, like being sort of like something that can be detached from a keyboard and just kind of easily carried around and thrown on a music stand. Like, I don't know what Apple wants the iPad Pro to be, if I can even say for sure if it's fulfilled its promise. I know there was definitely a period of my life where I was trying to like use it as a window to all the same data that I was doing on my Mac and all the same experiences. And that I learned a lot about automation and like a lot of pro apps during that time. But now I feel like because I've been in front of my Mac through a year of virtual teaching, I've sort of recontextualized it as like, what does Apple think this thing is? And StaffPad absolutely does fit into that model of what, at least with the current shipped iPad and iPadOS say is like, it's this like very unique form factor with very modular accessories. I feel like StaffPad just really fits into that vision that, at least, I don't know, do you think that, like, do you want more from the iPad, or do you kind of have like, is it sort of like this is the kind of category of things you do on a mobile tablet and then these are the kinds of things you do when you're in front of a desktop machine?
Yeah, well, I think the differentiation is quite good. I believe it was a Steve Jobs quote where he said that the iPad is kind of like a car, and desktop computers are like trucks. And I think he meant that in this sort of the American sense of the word, where you have the Ford F-50 and stuff. These kind of very utility. They're very, very useful. They're powerful. They're big. You can do a lot of stuff with them. They can go fast, but you can also throw in all your kind of hardware and all your stuff in the back on the load, on the flat loader. Um, but not everybody needs one of those. You know, a lot of the time you just want to get from A to B. And for that, a car is better. It's smaller, it's more efficient, it's lighter, it's simpler, it's easier to drive. And I think the iPad very much is that kind of thing. And to be honest, I'm not sure his prediction of, eventually there will be more cars than trucks on the road came true. I'm not sure that is entirely true. I don't have the stats or the figures, so I could be way off base here. But the feeling I get is that obviously desktop computers are going absolutely nowhere. They are brilliant at what they do. If you want that sit down experience, you have a desk, you have everything plumbed in. It's a great comfortable. It's more like your little home. You personalize it. The iPad is very much that little sports car where you don't mind. Maybe it's even like an automatic shift. It's very sporty, it's very speedy, but it doesn't give you all the utility of those trucks. But you have both. I have a desktop computer and I have an iPad. I use them for very different things, and there's nothing else like just being able to throw the tablet in your bag, or just carry it into another room, or just sit with it in bed, or just plug some, just connect up some AirPods or something, and just quietly work on the sofa. It's a very different experience, and if you can marry powerful enough software with that, then the experience is huge. The experience is very, very. Quite a life-changing experience, because it means you can do work, 99% of your work, pretty much anywhere you go. And then there'll always be those situations where the desktop computer is better.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer. You've sort of confirmed where I'm at least headed back to, is this sort of idea of like, okay, what is each thing best at? I
Yeah.
think where some people get hung up is that, Apple has done a lot to unify these platforms, and on the Windows end of things, which StaffPad has been available on Windows for longer. I mean, Windows tablets, I don't have enough experience with them to speak to as high a level of detail, but I mean, I know that a lot of them are, run however limited by the hardware they may be. Like, you can run like the standard Windows operating system on some of, if not all of, the
Oh
Microsoft
yeah.
products. So like in one respect, you've got like their stuff, which technically can like run anything that you might run at a desktop Windows PC. And then you've got Apple, who is like sort of philosophically saying like, all right, we want the design and the user interface of all of our platforms to share things in common. We've got now we've got three ways for someone to, using our own technologies, to make an iOS app, which is our most popular platform, run on the Mac. So like it seems like it's getting a little blurry. Like, there are times where I am on my iPad Pro with a keyboard and a trackpad attached, and I'm thinking like, oh, this just exactly feels like my Mac. So why can't I do X or Y or Z? And
Yeah.
similarly on the Mac, it's like, oh, I'm here and I'm on my Mac, and I'm like, oh, you know what? The iOS App Store's got like so many more countless apps on it. Why can't I just like trigger up? I don't know. Until recently, why can't I just like listen to my favorite podcast app, Overcast? Now they actually do have an app for the Mac now, because they are the new Apple Silicon Macs will run iOS apps. But like I guess that's where I get hung up. But like, I don't know if that many people really have, at least
Yeah.
other than people who are highly looking for that,
Into
or
it.
having that issue, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I use the analogy. I'd like to talk about my when we talk about iPads and computers, I like to bring up my mum, because she's not very good on computers, but she loves her iPad. And I think that's very much just the goal for Apple has always been to simplify the experience and make it a beautiful experience, but a simple experience. And with the iPad, they had a chance, on an iPhone, I should say, an iPad, they had a chance to completely start again, and they did. There are some legacy concepts in there, but by and large, the experience of using an iPad is vastly easier, and to some that's superior, because to some, simplicity and convenience will outdo power and complication every day of the week. And so when I look at a computing platform that is sort of for everyone, then probably a simplified iPad experience is that, because there will always be the power user that will have another more complicated solution as well on their desk.
Right.
But the general solution for the simplified experience, and that goes not just through the hardware, which, if you think about it, obviously the lines are getting blurred, exactly like you say now, with M1 chips, and or Apple Silicon chips, and the kind of continuity kind of thing that they're doing with even with universal control and things like that. But by and large, when you get an iPad out the box, you press the on button and it goes, hello, bonjour.
Yeah.
And it's ready to go. Like all you have to do is punch in a couple of things and you're ready to go. Whereas when you get a Mac, there's a few things to think about. And then you're kind of in this experience where it's like, and now what? Well, I need to go on the internet. I need to find some. Whereas the iPad is ready to go out the box. It's there. Everything is just a tap away. It's optimized for touch. It's very different to the kind of the Mac experience, where you have to be a good typist and you have to think a certain way. File system is a big thing on computers, traditional computers, I should say, Windows and Mac, and Linux, of course. But on the iPad, you don't need to think about a file system. Like this is a huge advantage for a lot of people. They don't need to think about it.
File system, and I don't know. It seems like a thing that ever since like maybe September, I have to mention every other episode of this show. That whole Verge article. I don't know if you read that article on the Verge about like college students, how professors are saying that like now they don't understand file systems because the generation who grew up with Google Docs and the public school system has now finally like so and I think it's interesting with iPad because now there is like this whole file system. There's a Files app on the iPad and it's kind of got some relationship to what the Finder does on the Mac side of things. And I almost wonder if like the original intent of like everything sort of just lives inside of the app was actually like the right way. It's just that it wasn't implemented maybe,
Sure.
or like they didn't go in far enough in on that. Because now we're seeing with like Google Docs, it's so everyone is using it growing up in our like we use it in my school district so much that the students get this idea of like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the tool first and then just search. And I know where my work is because I go to the tool, not necessarily because I go to some place that is like some sort of metaphor for like a physical desktop that I might have in my office. So I don't know. I mean, StaffPad sort of like does have its own kind of like file system and library in it. So I guess that was probably a pretty conscious choice
Yeah,
to kind of go that way.
the idea really was that you didn't need to leave the little StaffPad bubble, really. I mean, very much familiar to iOS users. The just your scores, in our case, your stuff is there. It's there when you need it. You can search in the app. You can do that stuff. You don't need to go and like open some form of file browser or file kind of explorer type thing, and think about managing your files. That was a very old school kind of concept to us. When we originally built in a whole system of keeping backups of old versions and things like that, and then we quickly realized that's only ever good if you do actually have access to the file system, because otherwise it gets quite difficult to manage that in an effective way. So you're better off making the file format more robust and things like that. But overall, the simplicity, and a lot of the tech support tickets we get are from Windows users who are battling the file system on Windows.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's like kind of operating the standard way that a file system would work. I haven't used a recent Surface tablet, so I actually don't like really know what the file, like if I want to go get to a StaffPad file from some sort of hierarchy of places I've organized my stuff, do I go to the Explorer or do I go straight into StaffPad, or is that the confusion?
Well, exactly. Yeah, the thing. There's many ways to achieve the same thing on Windows, and so yeah, I mean, the StaffPad experience on Windows is basically the same as it is on iOS, which is a little bit more alien for Windows users because they are more used to having things like just, oh, I'm going to double click a file on my desktop or whatever. So there's multiple ways that they can do that. And there is a StaffPad scores folder that you're asked to choose when you run StaffPad for the first time. There's a big difference. For example, on iOS, we just put it in iCloud, and we know that that's going to be available to you because it comes with every iPad. And if you don't, that's fine. It stores it in its local storage, and it does it in its own container, and that we know that's going to be fine. On Windows, it's sort of like, okay, yeah, you have to choose a folder, but you need to have the right kind of access permissions for that folder. And maybe you want to put it on OneDrive, but if you put it on OneDrive, then there's some access permission things that you have to kind of work through. If you put it on Dropbox, that's cool, but you might find in the background, when you delete something from within StaffPad, Dropbox might throw up a little message and say like, oh, hey, if you delete it here, it's not going to be available on all your other devices that run Dropbox. And that causes a block in the UI, which means you can't actually continue until you figure out where that dialog box is and press OK. These computer kind of concepts that are okay on Windows if you're familiar with Windows. But going back to an example of my mum, that's the exact type of thing where she'd go, what's going on? I don't understand.
Right.
So you don't have to deal with that on iPad OS. And yeah, to your point, that I think the blurriness is getting into territory where it's becoming less differentiated, which is not necessarily a positive thing. I think they're very smart about how they do it because it's not overcomplicating the iPad experience. It's just kind of adding bits that you can find and you can get to if you want to. But very much if you don't know about it, it's not there. It's not going to get in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we're sort of like skating along this line here, so I might as well just open this up to a more generalized question. Like, what are some of the things what are some of the other things that you think like distinguish StaffPad that are things that it cannot do? Like the decisions that the team made that were like, hey, this is something we know that we're all right. Because one of the things I really like that sticks out to me is I know I'm like in the middle school band room, so like my needs for a music notation editor, and I've used most of them that are out there, is like pretty minimal. Like I like to have a really fast workflow, and I like to use the powerful features that'll get me to go faster, but I don't need it to like really accomplish a lot of the stuff that one of these programs will do for me. So like I'm like reconstructing missing bass clarinet parts from my library and making worksheets for kids. So something that that like has a really that gives me the tools that I need and nothing else. And I understand that that's like a taste that's very specific to my own self, but like something that gives me what I need and doesn't give me what I don't need is appealing. And in many respects, the user interface of StaffPad hits a real sweet spot for me in my workflow, because I feel like it's not throwing 100 tools on the screen at once and leaving me wondering, like, what do I do?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, exactly. And I think, again, to use an analogy, I think Procreate and Photoshop is quite a good comparison, because Photoshop, legacy program, very complicated, 30 years of development. It can do, I mean, if you can't do it in Photoshop, you can't do it anywhere. It's really clever. It's great. You've got so many options, you've got so many things, and that's what Sibelius and Finale and those kind of desktop programs are today, and have been for a long time. And Procreate, the way it simplifies the art experience down to the kind of the most used things, and it does those things very quickly and very efficiently and quite intuitively. We wanted StaffPad to do that. So exactly to your point about how your needs might feel minimal, they're not. They are just, that's what you need. And I certainly found in my professional life that I was exactly the same. I didn't need a lot of stuff. So StaffPad, for example, doesn't do things like very complicated contemporary notation techniques. So you can't do feathered beams, you can't do like nested tuplets, things like that, where the majority of music, certainly that I write, and I think a lot of the people that write, a lot of my contemporaries write, is going to be performed probably in a recording studio or in a concert, but it's probably only going to be played once or read once, and then maybe recorded and listened to many times. But it's mostly a document that's just conveying your musical intent for that moment. And so you don't really need, or I don't really need, all the very specific control over layout. So for example, StaffPad doesn't do very precise manual layout. You have some basic things that you can configure, number of bars per line or number of measures per line, I should say, sorry, things like that. But you can't go in and say, I want to line break here and I want a page break here, partly because, well, if you can automate that, it makes everything so much faster. And because we knew that we were going to do effectively screen-based layout, that was going to be the primary way of doing it. Because again, if you're thinking about stuff you play maybe once or twice in a recording situation or a rehearsal situation or something, and a concert situation, you're going to want that music to change, you want it to update. That's the more important thing than having it look kind of publisher quality beautiful. So it's a living document. It's not a legacy. It's not an imprint or a sort of historical document. It's a blueprint of what's happening right now. It's going to change a little bit, and so that was the driving force behind the feature set in StaffPad. And of course, it's growing. It has grown. It will grow. But the driving number one thing that we try and think of is, how is this useful in our day-to-day musical lives? So something like adding a scripting language or something like that is just not on the radar, because it's not something that we would, or I would use. I don't think any of the people that that I know personally that use StaffPad, we haven't had a lot of requests for it. It's just not something that if you're kind of thinking about sort of writing a script that will do a crazy kind of like write some automated piece of bark or something, then I don't know. There are tools. There's a solution for you already. You don't need that to be kind of simplified and streamlined. It's inherently complicated.
Yes.
So very clear cut delineation of what does StaffPad do and doesn't do. StaffPad does composition, and I mean that in the sense of what we need as modern composers. So that's everything from, yeah, notation, but also audio, demo playback, mock-up playback from samples. It prints you out a score that looks surprisingly good. I think StaffPad doesn't really get much of a look in here, but it actually does do auto layout really well. And it does live updates for parts and things if you're connecting to the reader system. What it doesn't do is, yeah, it's incredibly fine-grained, precise manual control over layout. It doesn't do, yeah, complicated sort of plugin scripting, that kind of thing. It doesn't do third-party VST plugins or anything like that. It's all an integrated playback system. And it doesn't do, you know, things like very specific, like Gregorian chant, plain chant music, like, you know, different notation styles. It's very much an SWN. In fact, you can't even change the font of the music notation because, again, when you're in a situation where you've got to get the music down, the important thing is what you're conveying to the musician. Like the jazz font thing isn't, you know, it's nice, but it's not a core part of what you're trying to do here.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So yeah, you touched on a lot of things there. I think, let's see, where do I want to even go with this? Well, I think it's what you just hinted at. Is I asked you this at the beginning of the night. I asked you probably too many questions all at once. So I just want to come back to like what your use as a musician. Like, how would you describe like your personal use of StaffPad? How it sort of answers this? Because I think people would understand pretty clearly like why these are some of the decisions that were made. Because you're like in the studio quite a lot, right? Like you need to be able to like write something, make a quick change, and then have the change immediately push out to a bunch of musicians in a really fast timeline.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so that's what I always wanted to do, and I think that's when you're in that situation. It costs you money to stop and rewrite, or certainly redistribute music. And way back when we were thinking about StaffPad, from the sort of the genesis of it, was a recording studio situation where there was parts missing. And I can't remember if they just hadn't been printed or they hadn't actually been written.
Right.
But either way, there were musicians in this. It was actually a choir. They were shuffling in, 40 of them, and there was nothing for them to sing. And there was this realization that this is going to be a really expensive mistake. And it was in that moment we were like, well, it's actually, you realize how complicated it is to get music into people's hands when you have to kind of get it approved by somebody first, so they need to hear it. You need to then print it out, you need to distribute it, and then once that's done, you need to then kind of do that process again, the whole thing again, if you want to change anything other than just a couple of notes, which you can dictate obviously to the guys. And so the idea was like, why are we still printing this out? This feels like we're printing out emails or printing out like WhatsApp messages or something. It feels very old school.
Yeah.
So why don't we just stick it all on a screen? And then if it's on a screen, if there's something that's not there, you can just quickly write it and it'll be there. If you want to change it, you can just change it and it'll be there. And of course, that changes the paradigm quite a lot. So that was the genesis of StaffPad, and there's nothing that existed then. Because of course, if you're holding it in your hands, like you then want to be able to write on it, and the whole thing came from that kind of idea of being able to quickly change and update your music.
Yeah, having premiered a few musical theater productions and operas before, I like that feeling of like coming to the next day of rehearsal and having like the entire pit have like new copies like handed out to them, knowing that like someone was up all night reformatting that in Sibelius and then like printing that. It definitely highlights that problem super well. So yeah,
and unless you do things like the annotations that people make, to your point, but new parts. So if you've had a day of rehearsals and then you realize there's going to be some significant changes, like in the theater, for example, maybe there's going to be some significant changes overnight, then all that great stuff, that rich information that's been annotated by musicians on those parts is usually lost because you need to reprint them. And there's just not enough time overnight to go in and sort of, add all of the markings into the score. And sometimes they don't make any sense anyway to somebody else.
Right.
But if you can just use that document and just update it and all the annotations move with it, and it knows what's going on, then that's a powerful tool, for that situation. So again, going back to the genesis of it, that's what StaffPad is for. It's really not for legacy engraving of like something from the 1500s. It's just not for that at all.
Yeah. Well, and speaking also of ways that sort of you're working within the limitations of the platforms that you're on, I would say also that StaffPad sits in an interesting place on the App Store, I think, because there's not in a place that I really I wish more software sat in the place that StaffPad does, which is like people who are making real professional tools who are not afraid to ask for more than like $10.
Yeah.
That like, but also like but it's also StaffPad. Actually, to be honest with you, haven't seen what like is it still around like $99 unless it's on sometimes it's on.
Exactly. Yeah. We run sales these days, but
Yeah. Oh, and the sales are so generous, and I encourage anyone to. I always try to like share on my blog anytime it's on sale because I'm like, this is like insane. Please, like, if you're a teacher, you gotta jump on this. But even at like right below the $100 mark, I mean, that's like very affordable software by the standards of like what people are used to. If anyone's ever purchased like a music notation or like a digital audio workstation program for a desktop machine, like that's not in that same league yet. It's also not like sort of pandering to this like lowest common denominator of like like really cheap app quality software that's out there. So I think that's great. I mean, I would imagine that like the type of people who are using StaffPad are not the kind of people who are looking for like lots of different styles of licensing, or is that something that has come up like in people working in education or who are looking for some sort of like cross grade pricing if they're using another program? I would guess that's not really a thing.
Well, it's complicated because there's always, I mean, in the beginning, that would just be straight honest with you. I mean, the stuff is an expensive program to create. So
yeah.
We're not it's not like Apple itself decided one day to make and they can just kind of eat the loss or whatever. It's there's a real thing there. It's a niche market as well, so it has to be priced sort of. You have to work out kind of how many people you expect to get it versus what it costs to develop. And I always joke, people say, well, that must be great. I'm like, well, no, because if you wanted to make an app that is, just purely like, I would have invented Tinder. That's a much better money-making app. Like you don't do a very complicated notation app. So we price it at a point where it covers its costs and it's able to develop itself and run on its own. But you've got to be mindful of the App Store mechanics, and there is a ceiling on those things. I really put it down to that. What's the intrinsic value of it? So if I would say if I'm a musician or a composer of reasonable skill and have reasonable contacts and stuff, I could probably, and I have an existing work stream, I could probably download StaffPad and within a week complete a job with it that has made me more than $90. So, that's the reality of it, is that it's got value as a tool. And yeah, $10. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure the dynamics of it would work that well at $10, but it's an interesting one because the iPad Pro is so powerful. The iPad in general is so powerful. You can do these kind of level of apps with it where they're professional tools. You can absolutely use them for work. But because of where it started, the sort of mindset of an App Store, casual App Store user, is that everything should be free in-app purchase or a freemium or subscription or kind of very cheap.
Yeah.
So you definitely battle that, yeah, for sure.
Certainly, a lot are moving towards that subscription model. I mean, it's worked for some, like Adobe is maybe like, or Microsoft, or maybe the companies that I can think of that certainly, are doing that kind of thing, and maybe like pushing the industry towards that. But I just have to say, I appreciate and respect that it's like, here's a piece of quality software that I can pay for, and like I know that the money is going to a good place and supporting development, and is not and that like that development can give all sorts of power features into it. I'm not supporting something that where like the people who are developing the app are gonna like run out of money and then have to like stop working on it next month.
Well, exactly, and it lets you focus on things that are not necessarily what we call monetization features. So not exactly if you were running at a lower price point and you were going for volume of users, you would then be very, very wary of what the mass majority of people might want, or what might look good on advertising copy or something like that. So it might lead you down certain paths of feature development or certain paths of app direction or product management that were focused purely on just acquisition of users, rather than let's focus on doing the one thing well. It's not going to be for everybody. It's going to be quite specific, but hopefully those that like it will really like it and continue to love it even more as we keep going down that path.
I love that. You know, and I know people who work in, well, I would say even specifically in the space of music notation who are a little bit kind of like beholden to like what their very, very massive user base
Yeah.
wants. And the features that come next tend to be some sort of balance of like what's going to make us the most money and what are people asking for, not really like what do we think makes this product the best thing that it can be. So yeah, I totally support that. One of the things that very like is definitely like something that I think is like a focal point of StaffPad is like these sort of like in-app purchases that are like really, really, really high quality software libraries, like software instruments that can sort of be applied to the playback of the score in StaffPad. I'm curious. I always like to kind of get someone. I don't think this will interest anyone who's a teacher listening, but I'm just like as a someone who's interested in the industry and having someone who's in it, the thick of it, like yourself. I'm just curious, like I know like some people have told me like, okay, like I have maybe like the Spitfire string plugins on like I bought, you know, their offering on like my desktop PC, and that doesn't
Sure.
work with iPad OS
No.
apps because but you know iPad OS does have like the whole audio unit thing, and I know that that has like a similar architecture to like audio units on the Mac. Windows, I actually don't even know if like you can run a VST on the Windows version of StaffPad, but like that they're obviously, since it's like Windows running on the mobile tablet. I guess I'm just trying to figure out to myself like what's the future of audio plugins on mobile devices on Windows and Mac and iPad, I guess, and like what is it like working within that? Like I think you all strike a really good balance because for like a really, I mean, these are so much cheaper to buy inside of StaffPad. So I guess like where do you see this going?
Well, there's a few things to unpack there. I guess to start off with, no, the Windows version of StaffPad doesn't support VST or anything like
Okay.
that. There's no external plugin support
Okay.
in StaffPad, deliberately so.
Yeah.
Um, why is that? Well, because StaffPad is a notation first app, does audio now, so obviously this is a little less cut and dried. But basically, there are no good notation plugins really. Like in terms of you go get contact, and then you've got to go fine. Then you've got to go and buy something to go in it, and then you've got to like load how that, you know, figure that one out, and then you've got to build some kind of mad expression map or something like it. It's not a straightforward experience, and even if you do, the way that these plugins are designed is that they're real-time plugins. They're for real-time use. So you can plug your keyboard in, your MIDI keyboard, and you can jam on them. That's great. But when you're looking at a score, semantically, it's got everything in there. As humans, we understand it. But when you look at it as kind of just raw code, trying to export that kind of information into a VST plugin or a real-time format like that, whether it's AE or AAX or VST or whatever, the interface just isn't right for that. And there's some workarounds, excuse me, there's some workarounds you can do, but generally speaking, they're real-time formats they're based on, you know, sound engines for keyboards and things like that. So it wouldn't be necessarily that useful to be able to load in, for example, the Spitfire player into StaffPad, because then you open up a whole can of worms of what's the practical aspect of using those sounds from a score? And that gets really hard. So with StaffPad, it wasn't just a technical, like a limitation of the platform where we said, right, well, we're not going to be able to support it. There is that because obviously developers like Spitfire and Orchestral Tools and anyone who has a sampler or a plugin or anything like that would then have to re-engineer and rebuild their plugin for Universal iPad as well as Mac or whatever it might be in the future. And that's not always straightforward because a lot of these guys build their plugins on top of other architectures. They're not building these things from scratch.
Right.
So there's a foundation layer.
Yeah.
Like a kit that you can put stuff together, and that kit doesn't relate to iPad. So
Correct,
their
right.
plugins will never, you know, until the guys that make the kit update their stuff, they can't update. There's too many dependencies. So there's the other piece of the puzzle is that StaffPad was always designed for simplicity and convenience, and we wanted to be able to give sort of cohesion and consistency across the playback experience. So there isn't really any kind of discrimination between, you know, if you're using Cine samples or if you're using Orchestral Tools or if you're using Spitfire, the experience is the same. the sound is different because of the guys recorded it in various different spaces with different musicians, different approaches. But they've all kind of been morphed into the StaffPad version of that. So they behave in the same way. A lot of them have similar articulations. So what you're really picking is what kind of sound do you want? What kind of music are you writing? What fits that kind of sound best? And then there's the other aspect of it, which is somewhat forward-looking, which is, you get any DAW or any program where there's plugin support, and you kill any kind of ability to reliably share projects with other people.
Yeah.
Because if I send you a Logic project, it doesn't matter if you've got Logic, it's probably not going to open in the same way as it opens for me, because I'll have a certain set of plugins and a certain set of sample libraries and a certain set of things that you don't have. And unless you have an identical rig, it's not going to work reliably, and especially not at scale. If you've got hundreds of thousands of users sharing files, they're not all going to have identical rigs. So in the future, if there's ever going to be any kind of standard where you can say, well, I can send you a StaffPad file and I know that it's going to work, you might have to click a couple of buttons if you don't have those libraries. But once you've got them, it will work. We know that. So that kind of standardization and consistency and cohesion across the ecosystem is really important. And again, between Windows and Mac, the sound is identical. There's so many reasons why we didn't go down the plugin route. The future of audio plugins on mobile is, not for me to say. I think they're doing, iPads and Macs, as you were saying before, they're kind of blurring into similar things, especially with Apple Silicon. A lot of developers will have to, or have already updated their code for it to be able to run on ARM chips. So you'll see probably a lot more of that stuff showing up on iPad at some point.
Yeah, that'll be super interesting to see. Yeah, so just using Spitfire as an example, since I mentioned them already, like, did they do, you said like they have sort of like a platform, maybe not a platform is the word you used, but like they have like sort of an architecture they're building their stuff on. Like, did the StaffPad development team like have to provide that for them, or did they have to like rework it for iPad OS? Because to my knowledge, like they don't, maybe I'm probably wrong about this, but do they have their plugins available inside of other kinds of audio applications on iPad OS, or is that like a very specific relationship that?
That's as far as I know, that's a very specific relationship. They don't do a lot of licensing in general, these guys. The thing is, so the developers, the sample library developers, don't have to do anything. They just supply the original sessions,
right,
the audio, and then we take over and do everything.
I see.
That library from scratch. Yeah, my point about why the Spitfire player, or for example, Sign, the orchestral tools player, or the Cine samples isn't available at the moment on iPad, is likely, and I don't know. I'm just using plugins in general is that the plugins aren't often just single pieces of code written by a single developer. There's often bits brought in from other people and other frameworks and things that might not all be iPad compatible. And the big one is one of the C Boost, for example. So that's something where there's a technical sort of block at the moment. But these are all becoming much more fluid as people move to Apple Silicon. Yeah.
Well, the result of all of these little sort of decisions, like the Apple Pencil as primary method of, getting information into a score, the like sort of minimal but like excellent default look and feel of a score once sent or shared or printed, a way that you can easily integrate these sort of like really high quality like audio samples, like all of these things sort of converge to make this what feels like a magical experience. Like, it's no surprise that Apple has featured StaffPad. It very much has this feeling, this sort of like the ideal is like, yeah, okay, I'm like scribbling on my iPad in the way I would write on a piece of paper, and then like the result is that I can hear back something that sounds as nearly as close to what we can produce as far as like a sample library of orchestral sounds can be, and that is like all through this like very, very tactile direct manipulation of the Apple Pencil and the screen, and you can be sitting on the couch and doing it. I mean, there's definitely like a magic feeling to doing that, which is why I think it's so powerful. So I don't know where I'm going with that. I just wanted to say awesome job with everything so far.
Thanks. I mean, you know what? We never really set out for just the focus on natural input or handwriting input. I know it annoys some people, but it's not. It's there because when you've just got a piece of glass in front of you, that's the most natural kind of experience of manuscript paper that you can kind of get to. With otherwise, you're connecting up the keyboards, and you've got some floating palette. So there's some kind of thing in the way. And once you kind of do that, you realize, especially once you can erase and rub out and write music, we didn't have tons of menus and tons of things when we were just writing on paper. So when you transfer that experience to effectively, paper behind glass, effectively, it kind of feels magical because you just get all the benefit of being able to then play it back and stuff like that. But it's just the same thing as we were doing on paper. It's not that magic, if you know what I mean. It's kind of old. But,
yeah. Well, I think since you mentioned the Apple Pencil, I do want to ask you about the Apple in the spirit of the iPad being this thing that's okay, it fits. If I understand it as it's going to do this and it's going to do this well, it works great. It works great for me. But the second I start to think, okay, but what it can do, what if I do a little bit more? The second I start to ask myself, what more can it do for me? Then sometimes I hit sticking points. And I guess what I would say is StaffPad is such a well-designed app that there are times where I feel okay, but what if I did just put it on this magic keyboard that Apple made for me and then could type some letters on the keyboard to input some notes? I have to imagine this is definitely something that people are writing to you all about. I mean, is it at a volume where that's a serious thing you all are questioning, or is it or do you feel pretty decisively that the Apple Pencil is the way forward, or can you not answer this question for obvious reasons?
Well, we don't like to talk about future development because it generally causes a bit of chaos and for lots of reasons. When you've got a magic keyboard is an optional accessory. Some people have it, most people don't. What you do, say you could the same for pencil. When you require a pencil, you're kind of saying a very specific thing, and people have to invest in that kind of accessory. What we found is that there are some great things or programs already that do MIDI keyboards, punch in a note or QWERTY entry, and those solutions they exist. They have done for a long time. What wasn't really existing for us was that kind of natural input fluid thing where it's just write it, press play. So that's what we did. And if you try and merge too many things together, you do add layers of complexity. They're unintended, but they have to be there. So as soon as you add QWERTY entry, for example, then you have to add some way of being able to then edit or adjust that afterwards,
right.
To go back and correct your mistakes. You have to have some form of this is now an input cursor. Where is that going? Then you have to be able to go in and out of an input edit mode, that kind of thing. And you've introduced the idea of a mode, whoops. That's the thing now. There's a cognitive layer that people have to understand, and they go, well, I should be pressing, this should be playing back, and it's not. It's just adding the same note over and over again. That kind of, you hit these stumbling blocks where you've now added a computer layer, whereas the focus on pencil is very much, well, you just, wherever you put your pencil, you're just writing some music. There are modes, of course, there's selections and all that stuff, but generally speaking, if you're writing, if there's ink on the screen, it's writing. So
yeah, I do actually. It's a good point because in lots of notation software I've used, the input mode is sort of this default, and everyone, even the most experienced users, have had that thing where it's I thought that thing was highlighted, that half rest was highlighted and it was an active thing, and when I typed the letter C, the note C would, but actually I had to hit this keystroke first and see the blinking cursor on screen. I don't know. I just with StaffPad, it's just drawing, and I appreciate that because that reminds me of some of the many kind of PDF apps that are on iPad OS. One of my favorites is called GoodNotes, and one of the primary things I like about it is that I don't use it as a PDF creation or editing tool. I just use it once I have a PDF that I like and I want to use it as a paper style. And what I do is once I'm looking at it in GoodNotes, there's no mode that lets the Apple Pencil annotate it. It's just always accepting touch input. And I think in the spirit of, getting these things to feel more direct, that we can manipulate them more directly, that's an essential bit of the puzzle.
The idea of a mode, I mean, that's so, again, we're into it. So we just sort of accept that that's a thing. And especially if you've ever used you're used to those kind of desktop programs, then it's not that intimidating. But if you're coming at it and you're a musician who is not necessarily, technically minded, or a musician who hasn't used Sibelius or Finale or all those things before, because you're a musician or a composer or something, um, an input mode is already an alien concept. It's really hard to kind of explain. Like we know about it. It's well, yeah, of
Right.
course, you go and input, and then you probably press escape to get out of it, right? Because why? That's what you do.
Right.
But
Exactly.
like that's so alien. Like why would you think of that? If you didn't know about
Right.
it already, that's such an alien concept. So the modes are a funny thing, and actually, it's even one of the things that we battled against with Apple originally on the App Store was that StaffPad requires Apple Pencil. It's a very unusual app. There's only a couple that do. I think is it Shaper that Shaper 3D. There's a couple that do, but generally, you can't get music in unless you have an Apple Pencil, which is highly unusual for an iPad app. Um, so that was again because we didn't want to have a mode. We didn't want to have a button that was like, now you're drawing. Um, so yeah, it definitely cuts down the audience size. It definitely cuts down the kind of the number of people that can use it. But for those that can, it does make it a much better experience, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, totally. And I'll say too, like especially in the first year of release, I think like that the pencil handwritten recognition is like even like getting better. I like at a very rapid rate. Like I assume that these kinds of engines just take years and years and years of development, and then eventually you consider them ready, and then you release them, and then you continue to iterate, but the user does not feel that rate of improvement as much as they do the first time they go from not experiencing the app to experiencing it. But in my
Mhm.
case, I feel like like the 1 year marker of using StaffPad was like a remarkably more accurate experience for me than like the first day. Like, are you all just like grinding real hard on this engine? Like, how are you doing? How are you making this improve so fast? I guess is what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, behind the scenes, we're constantly tweaking, and the it's not that fun to talk about that stuff. The release notes or feature videos or something. You've got a very limited amount of time with people's attention and engagement. So to say like we have improved the handwriting, that's kind of
Right.
boring. Whereas like now it does this,
Yeah. Yeah.
audio is
Yeah.
this. That's much more fun and much more relevant, and also something we work really, really hard on. And we just kind of continually every update or every point update has some kind of improvement, somewhere.
Yeah. 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 Well, I guess the most recent major feature update is like all these new audio things that you can
Yeah.
throw into. And I'm actually not using that. You have a technical term that I was slipping my brain for some of these new features, but like I think of
Oh,
like yeah.
audio
What
staffs.
audio?
Yeah,
That thank
we
you.
just call them audio
That's the
staffs.
one I was looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is the feature that you were in the talking about in the WWDC video last year. So yeah, it was. You said earlier in the conversation, June 2021. That was in fact a little under a year ago. It's wild to think it was less than a year ago that
Yeah,
I.
I think it was actually March 2021, I
Oh,
think.
was it an
Yeah.
iPad announcement, not a developer?
It was to do, it was when they released the M1 chip.
That's
So
correct.
this was the
Yes.
first
Okay.
device with M1, yeah, the first Apple Silicon. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, what is the sort of scope of like what are some of the general like major new things someone can do with this?
Yeah, I mean, it gives you, for I think the first time, to my knowledge, the ability to add multi-track audio into a notation score. Um, so this opens up a lot of things. Like you could do, for example, you could throw in a vocal and write an arrangement around that vocal, sound effects if you're doing a score, dialogue if you're doing a film score or something on TV. You can record as well audio. You don't have to import it. You can record it straight in with these phenomenal iPad mics that we were talking about before the show, and really surprised at the level of quality those mics gave you during development. We were really blown away by them. So this means you can just stick the iPad on your piano and play your real piano into it, or your guitar into it. You can play whatever instrument you have, sing into it. And then you can edit that audio as well. You can manipulate that. So you can cut it, trim it, fade it, loop it. Obviously kind of comp stuff. You can multi-track audio, multi-clip audio on the same staff. So you can, actually use this like a DAW sort of audio feature. Then we have a whole sort of host of audio effects you can add. So everything from compression and de-essing to crazy, modulation effects and rotary and choruses and things like that. And time stretch it. So if you've recorded it and then you decide you all want it to be 20 BPM faster, 20 BPM slower, you can do that just very easily. And you can even tempo map it. So if you played your piano off click and you don't know what tempo it is, or it wavers about in tempo, you can drag the bar lines around and fix the tempo that way and map your score to that. So it gives you ability to create a very human sounding score by, sort of playing naturally into it and then mapping the score. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, human sounding is a good way of describing the playback and StaffPad, but also like I think this is where the magic comes in. I was talking about earlier is like also the human feeling of creating it by physical touch also sort of makes us like I don't know, some like harmonious circle of like productivity where you're just like you're putting it in a natural way, you're hearing it back in a natural way. That bar line movement thing you mentioned, because also when you're handwriting notes on the staff, that's the other thing that I think makes it really easy. It's like everyone's had that experience of like you're writing, you're like making a poster or something and you start the letters too big, and so it's like with StaffPad, if you run out of room for notes, you just with the pencil drag the bar line, and that's just such a natural and intuitive thing. So yeah, these audio features are great. I don't know of any, there certainly are some digital audio workstations where you can view a MIDI track as notation, but not anything I know of that's so effectively does it in the other direction. That's like sort of notation based with audio tracks.
And all together as well. So there are DAWs where you can sort of you can view the MIDI as notation. But not really in a score format. So, you think about, you might have a full orchestral score and then 2 or 3 audio tracks running along in the middle of it. There's nothing, to my knowledge anyway, the StaffPad's the first to do that and literally visualize it. And you can even print it out. So you could, if you have a very specific waveform with some big hits and that, your conductor needs to see it and be aware of it, it's right there. And of course, you can add text to those audio staffs as well. So you can even, if you have a vocal, one of my big pet peeves is when you're writing out like a pop chart or something, and you have to do the vocal just because, and it's never going to actually be played by any kind of instrument other than a singer who's probably not going to read the notes. So they're just going to learn it by hearing it. So this is the kind of the classic vocal R sound that comes back at you, just kind of ruins everything. You think, I just want the actual vocal in there. So being able to pull the vocal in or record that in and, just add the lyrics like just as text to that staff is really useful. Yeah. I've actually seen people use it in a music education context. I've actually seen people, teachers leave voice notes in the score. So they'll just like listen to the assignment or whatever the piece is and have a conversation with the composer through the audio staff.
That's interesting. Yeah. Actually, this is where I wanted to go next, was just some teacher use cases for StaffPad. And actually, a couple of episodes ago, by the time this releases, there will have been an episode with Anthony Wilkes from Playscore, and something that came up. For those who don't know, Playscore is like you take a picture of a piece of music and then it can, interpret that and then play it back to you. And one of the things that came up as sort of like an education use case for that was like I think of like choral directors who want to oftentimes they have to provide piano accompaniment for their students, and then they have to kind of get away. They try to get away from the piano and be doing great pedagogy as much as possible without having their focus diverted. And so play along tracks are a really essential thing. And I'm just thinking to myself of how much you could do. I haven't personally made a lot of play along material in StaffPad itself, but like that, there's a huge potential there for choral directors, are people who are working with like string quartets or any kind of situation where you need to have something that a student is listening to for reference or even practicing along to. And then to be able to add these sort of other layers that are not necessarily notation into it that sort of help them, whether it's like a tempo change being counted off in advance or a sound effect to signal in the next section of music. Like in my case, I love using justly in tune drones that produce like intervals for kids to tune to, like just stable, steady pitches. I would probably add some of those into the background of a background track. So yeah, I mean, there's just tons of things. What are other use cases that educators write to you all about and say, like, here's a problem this is solving for me in the classroom?
Well, the reader is the big one. I think that lets you do a lot of those things that you were talking about. For example, your choral director who might need to go up front. If you've got the score written out in StaffPad and you've got whatever, even just the basic playback stuff going on, or an audio track behind the scenes. If everyone's got the reader going and you're synced up there, then yeah, you can absolutely go out there and everybody's still getting the kind of the cues, as it were. You know, they can see where they are, they can hear it, they can take it away. If you give them the StaffPad file, they can take it away and learn it that way because the audio will come through if you actually give them the StaffPad file. And they can mute their part, solo their part. So it's a great thing for rehearsal. And of course, you can annotate it both ways. So if you're in an education context, or even, I mean, any rehearsal context, and somebody might need a little bit of a push here or there, but you don't want to call it out necessarily into the class or into the group, you can annotate just their staff, just their part, and it will show up just for them. You've done it silently; they can see it. There's no end of different kind of one-to-one. Of course, this is all based, if you're connected on Wi-Fi, that it's all based in the room. But there's a great use case for actually showing people the StaffPad file itself, and they can go away and use the reader to kind of ingest that and learn from that. They can see everyone else's part as well if you choose. So I think for music education, I know there's a few different people using it. The reader very successfully in schools, and of course the reader's free. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite things too, and this relates to kind of like a just like a little nice touch to the, well, it's sort of a combination of actually a very cool Apple feature and a very cool StaffPad feature sort of working in harmony together. I saw someone, I think it was on Twitter, someone, this is every now and then someone will like, there will be a viral tweet that's like my mind was blown when I saw this, and it's like some basic thing that only because I follow Apple really closely, I've known about it for years. But the recent trend is, and so I'm going to say it, it's actually my tech tip of the week for later in this recording. So I'm going to say it now. It's if you three finger pinch something, like if you select some text, or if you're looking at a photograph or anything that is copyable on an iPhone or an iPad, and you three finger pinch it, you have to kind of get the there's like you got to practice the gesture, but once you get the gesture, you can copy something to your clipboard. And the video depicts someone basically copying a picture from their iPhone and then pasting it. The iPad sitting next to them has the Notes app open, and then you do the opposite gesture to paste. You basically like slide your three fingers apart. But because of another Apple feature called Universal Clipboard, which syncs the thing you've copied and pasted across your Apple devices, he's able to basically like pinch. It looks like he's lifting the photo off of the iPhone and then like placing it on the iPad, and it's kind of this magic thing. StaffPad has a cool thing where a selected couple of measures, when copied, will paste like a really, really clean image of like that bit of the score, like perfectly cropped, like with a double bar line at the end, even if that was not the end of the section, and it'll put the key and the clef in the beginning, even if I didn't start from the first measure. That's like the coolest feature, and is like worth the price of admission to me alone. I can tell you, if I'm like making so we use Canvas, which is like learning management software for like making assignments for kids. And sometimes I'm just like, hey, I just need like to show them on a staff, like, here's what you're going to play, or here's what I'm talking about this note, here it is. Sometimes I'll just open up StaffPad, draw a couple short little thing in the Apple Pencil, three fingers, like, pinch the selection on StaffPad, and then like hit Command V on my Mac, and then just watch as the thing that I've just scribbled sort of like pastes into this shareable, but like not even a score, just like some other thing that I have, some other document I've created. That's like a magical thing. I'm like always sort of like petitioning other makers of music notation software to implement that kind of copy and paste. I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, we actually had a plan to be able to do it the other way around as well. So, copy. I mean, we should point out, you don't have to three finger. That's a cool way to copy, but you can just press the copy button if you don't want to do the three finger gesture. But that's great. That was because a lot of the time, you just want to send maybe a quick change or something to someone you're working with or whatever, and you just want to paste it into messages or something. Very useful for creating worksheets, as you say. It's very useful for just doing that. We wanted to embed some music XML in the metadata as well of that image, so that you could potentially, if someone then iMessaged you that image, you could then copy and paste it into StaffPad, go reverse, and you wouldn't be doing, it would always be reliable. You wouldn't be doing recognition on the image or anything like that. It would just be the XML is right there in the image as well. Yeah, we haven't got around to that one yet, but that's kind of a cool feature. And maybe if there's people from other notation programs listening, we could make all of that just standard, and you could do that from any program. Who
Well,
knows?
that would be pretty cool. I mean, that would be excellent. Because the truth is, like, I am. I don't. I guess, yeah, maybe I'm unique in this. I'm using multiple tools. I think, that's clear, and that's partly just because of the utility that they offer me. Like, there are times where I'm using like Dorico on my desktop machine to make things, and that workflow fits into a certain place in my life. But then also, Noteflight is a web-based
Yeah,
teaching tool that has its own like learning management stuff baked into it now. So like that is an external tool that my students use. Like I can make an assignment in our Canvas class, link out to a template I've made in Noteflight. But the thing is like Noteflight is not the necessarily the thing I'm fastest in making stuff. So
yeah,
sometimes I'll make something short in StaffPad or Dorico if I'm sitting at my desktop, and I'll just bring it in via XML. And yeah, to have that standard to be able to just copy and paste it right in rather than like doing a lot of document management fussing would
yeah,
be. I support you in this quest. Would be great.
yeah, yeah. I mean, to be fair, it doesn't even have the images. If you just copy and paste and it just does its XML on the clipboard, that would be fantastic. But yeah, you never know. We'll keep plugging away.
Yeah. Well, speaking of recent podcast episodes, actually, I think probably by the time that this releases, the most recent episode will have been Bob Chreste from Muse Group, and we are talking all about MuseClass. And I know StaffPad was not too long ago was acquired by the Muse Group, who makes MuseScore, which is another music notation tool.
Indeed.
MuseClass, which is like offering some musically specific learning management features, and
Yeah.
Audacity is probably another one that's famous with music teachers. And there's I think to the extent that you feel like you can or it's beneficial to answer this question, I guess do, or we can just kind of skip it and move on. But like I whenever I see these kinds of acquisitions happening, I think to myself like, I always like to have tools that there's a balance. There's like suites of apps that do work in harmony together, and then there's like individualized, specialized tools that are just really good at one thing. And I have there's benefits and drawbacks to both. I guess I would ask, like, is there like, do you feel like is the goal, or at least the near future vision of StaffPad, to continue to just sort of run independently as it has, or are there like talks of like bigger strategies of integrating the workflows of the different tools, or is that not really? Does this question make sense? I don't know.
It does, yeah. I mean, I think it's more about finding some sort of natural synergies between them rather than trying to force too much kind of, trying to shoehorn in some kind of interconnecting kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? But interoperability. I don't think that necessarily, even if you look at Adobe, they have a huge suite of products. They don't necessarily all interop. After Effects maybe it's not particularly relevant to Photoshop or whatever it might be. But there are some levels, there's some natural times where it makes sense to be able to kind of open a Photoshop file in After Effects or whatever it might be for that analogy.
Right.
And Muse Group, so the brand there is enabling creators to do more. Basically, that's the vision for Muse Group. It's let's create tools and services that let talented people or people that are interested in expressing themselves creatively do that at a whole range of different places, different levels of scale, different levels of price, different levels of everything. And it's very much an enabling kind of strategy there. So whilst I can't speak for larger strategies at Muse Group, I know that StaffPad is very much focused on trying to be the best StaffPad it can be. It's not necessarily thinking about trying to how are we going to interface with Audacity or something like that. That's
Right.
on the radar. And like I say, as for larger Muse Group strategies, that's not for me to say. But we're very much focused on how do we make StaffPad and how do we continue to build that and secure its future, which is another large reason. I mean, we realize that most small startups, at some point in their life, they have to be either acquired or shut down. That's basically the two options.
Yeah.
So it's a natural extension of what looks it is a natural extension of what should be a healthy company life cycle. And joining a stronger group and having additional resources and all those kind of things that come with that, the part of being a part of a bigger ecosystem, a bigger umbrella company, is about securing the future and all of that kind of stuff for StaffPad. So yeah, I mean, the team hasn't changed. We're very much focused on like how do we do what we're doing kind of even better. You know?
Today, I would like to introduce you to my scale exercise play along tracks with trap beats, available for sale at robbyburns.com. These trap beat play-alongs include over 72 audio recordings, each of which includes a count-off, a trap beat at 70 beats per minute, and a tuning drone playing both the tonic and each note of the scale in just intonation, so your ensemble can learn to play in tune, develop steady, sustained tone, and blend with other sounds. These drones are stacked over top engaging trap beats that help students to practice at slower tempos while developing steadiness of time and a better concept of how the beat is subdivided. The scale exercises include whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, scale in thirds, and a mini scale with an arpeggio at the end in all 12 keys. I've also included 3 speed variations of a Remington exercise, so band ensembles can work on their favorite tone and technical exercises, whether they be from a method book or of your own invention. The tracks are $15, but for $40, you can get the stems to the tracks in Logic Pro and GarageBand format, so that you can do things like speed them up and slow them down, change the pitch, add your own accompaniment, take out my voice and add your own,
and 2 and 3 and go,
or even sequence the tracks together to completely automate your ensemble warm-up. These tracks are perfect for running through your Google Meet, Zoom, or virtual teaching platform of choice, or for running through the loudspeakers at the beginning of your in-person rehearsal. Check them out now at robbyburns.com/store.
Yeah, it might be quite a good idea to just cover the handwriting recognition stuff a little bit, just to give people an expectation level of that.
Sure.
Yeah, anything that's recognition based, I think there's somewhat an expectation that it will work instantly, or at least a hope or a dream that it will work instantly for everybody, regardless of penmanship. And we see this with Alexa. When you first get, I mean, she might pipe up in a minute now. For me it works great. For my fiance, not so much.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily StaffPad's recognition engine is designed around a sort of what we call a sort of the academic model of writing. So it's not designed to be flawless against your, maybe custom kind of idiomatic kind of writing style. What it's supposed to do is give you a very reliable experience if you are writing sort of the way that was taught in music school, both in the UK and in America. So that if you write that way, you can have an incredible experience with it. If you've got a very different or very sort of specific style, or it's not necessarily that accurate, you might struggle a little bit with it. It's important to say that, I think, before people dive in. What we find mostly is that there's tutorials that kind of get you up and running, and we find that most people spend a couple of hours with it and then get a pretty good grasp of what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. Once you get it, it's incredibly liberating. But I always do like to put a disclaimer out there that it's not going to just magically understand what you mean. You have to be somewhat complete about it in somewhat.
Yeah.
For sure, it sounds obvious when you say it, but there is a level of expectation the engine makes, about your ability.
Yeah, to some extent, a computer does have to want to be used in a certain way in order for it to give consistent results to the user. For sure.
Yeah, and we have things like, scale, for example, like the size that you draw things is very important.
Yeah.
So as with anything, if you're learning to write on manuscript paper, I'm sure, if you've got set of assignments back in, and the minim, the half note, was drawn over sort of 3 spaces or something. This is not clear. It's not clear what note
Right.
it's supposed to be. It covers a few. And likewise, so StaffPad in that scenario is not going to reject it as such. It's not going to try and just go, yeah, maybe it's a B, maybe.
Yeah.
It's going to leave it as ink. It's going to say, look, you might want to revisit this. Maybe it's not even a notation at all. Maybe it's a scribble. Maybe you're doing a graphic. Maybe it's not supposed to be a standard Western notation. So we'll just leave it there. We'll just keep that preserved, and you can come back and revisit that in the future if you want to. And that's actually one of the key concepts. And I think when you start out with StaffPad, maybe you see these pending bars, as we call them, which are sort of orange bars where some of the ink is left intact. This is not recognized, deliberately so, to give you a chance to go back and either correct it or look at it again, or not. You know, maybe it is, and maybe you're writing something that's not music. Maybe you're drawing something. Maybe it's a squiggle.
Yeah.
And the idea is you'd be able to mix and match those again without having to go into a special mode or something. So yeah, I think it's important to cover the recognition engine. Once you've got it and it's working beautifully, I've seen people write so unbelievably fast with StaffPad that my mind is melted. Like, there's some film guys that I know who are just insanely quick with it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that was actually one of the tips that your team gave me when I was early on. I was zooming in really close, thinking like, okay, if I draw this as neat as I possibly can, there's no way it will fail. And then actually someone on your support team was like, actually, why don't you just like relax a little bit and like zoom out a little bit and just kind of like do it like you're scribbling. That helped immensely for me, was to just not think about the perfection.
Well, as an aside, I don't know. So the recognition engine in StaffPad, it doesn't sort of like take a picture of your ink and then try and do some kind of like picture working out from image recognition or anything like that. It's actually looking at the path of vector strokes that you're drawing with the pen or pencil. So yeah, you know, we see it as ink, but in code, it's a set of points. And if you go really slowly, you know, in your mind, you're going, oh, I'm being super careful about this. What you're doing is you're creating so many of these tiny little points that we then have to do all this thinning out and all this kind of stuff to be able to understand it at all, because it just looks like a bunch of points.
Right.
And actually, it works in your favor to go a little bit quicker, like you say, a little bit more relaxed, be less sort of conscious of it, if you will, whilst keeping in mind that it still has to be correct. It can't be just wildly random, you know. And then once you've got that, it's actually incredibly fast. And there's some concepts in there that we deliberately try and discourage, like the football notehead type thing, where you scribble in the notehead like a tiny little circle over and over again, because it's really slow. It's not good. You just need a little diagonal mark and you just move on. That's fine. But again, it's kind of how it's taught in music school. It's how I was taught. It's very much a speed-driven thing, and you can just go tick, 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 tick for your stems, boom, for your beam, you're done. You know, it's very, very fast. If you do spend a long time coloring in the notehead, I mean, it will work, but you might get less consistent results, and you will have spent a long time doing it.
Yeah, for sure. I've got some app of the week, album of the week, and tech tip of the week sections that I typically will cover every episode. Or do you want to participate in that? And we can, of course, anything else you want to say about StaffPad before that, you've got the floor.
Oh, I tell you, there's so much. No, let's go for it.
Let's do it. Okay. Yeah. All right, I'm pumped. Well, I already said maybe I'll go in reverse order, since I already said my tech tip was and I'll just give these features a name. Universal Clipboard is the thing where if you're using a bunch of Apple products, you copy something on one device, you should, in theory. It's like it works 98% of the time for me. Then I paste into another device. It's a great feature. I use it all the time. And then, of course, the gestures for copy paste. So the 3-finger pinch to copy something, and then the 3-finger. What's the opposite of a pinch? A spread? I don't know. What do you call that? What's the
pinch out? I think they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
of course, very good. I think they call it a pinch out.
Yeah, and then my challenge to anyone who's testing out StaffPad for the first time, or who's had it installed for years, is like, if the next time you're making some sort of worksheet in a word processor and you want to insert a little piece of notation in there that looks really, really super clean, go on StaffPad, scribble it out, select it, just pinch it with 3 fingers, and then hit Command V on your other device and see the magic happen. That's my tip.
Very cool. Or other app. Even on the iPad, you just paste it into Pages or paste it into GoodNotes.
Yeah, or like notes, or a text message. I don't know, whatever. Whatever. I don't know how many people out there iMessage their friends little bits of their scores. I've done it before.
I am a big nerd. I do it quite often.
Yeah, I'm sure. Does anything come to your mind as like a tip that you've been using lately? Something that would save someone time or energy on a computer?
Well, this is a slightly more power tip, if that's all right.
That's great.
Automation is your friend. There's an incredible app on Mac, or there's a couple, you can get them, but just automate as much. If you find yourself doing a laborious task over and over again, automate it. You'd be amazed at what you can automate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's it.
Do you have any tools you like to use for automate? I can say, like, I've mentioned Keyboard Maestro on here before. That's a
Keyboard Maestro. Yeah, it's a great one. But even Automator comes with every Mac. It's free. It's there. It's already installed. It's really powerful. You get in there and use it. Even things like just basic stuff like renaming files. You can just do this in Finder now. You can just rename files from your right-click menu.
Yeah.
Get a mouse with a right-click. Yeah. If you're using a Mac, get a mouse with a right-click.
Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, well, okay. I feel like you opened the door for me to ask this here, so I'm just going to do it. So, I mean, StaffPad is on iOS. I'm a big shortcuts app user.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess. Hold on. Can I guess the number? You probably don't know off the top of your head. I'm going to guess that more than 0 people, but probably very few people have ever requested that you had shortcut support to StaffPad.
Yeah, you'd be the first one, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, that's my job. Every time I have someone in development of any kind on here, that's always like my. I feel like I should just add it to the outline template that I send everyone, just so that they're prepared. I'm going to ask you about shortcuts. It's hard to imagine, like, because so much does happen in the container that is StaffPad, like in that environment. It's hard to imagine, like, what thing would I want to happen in StaffPad that's a part of a string of other things happening on my device.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you on that.
If you can find me a useful thing, I imagine, like, just dim the lights as soon as and then create a new score. Get me in the mood.
That's it. Yeah, that's a good one. Well, one thing I'll say is, like, let me think of like something. So yeah, it's like audio hijack is what I'm using to record my end of the call, and like they just have released shortcut support. So like I have a little on my Stream Deck right here. I have a little. Can I stretch this front here? I'll show you with my camera. So I've got like a little. You can't see the detail because of the angle of the camera, but I've got a little podcast button that I press, and that like boots up my Zoom call and pulls up my notes that I've shared with you, and it does a bunch of things that I need to happen. But one of the steps now is that it will start. It'll run a session in Audio Hijack, which is like my session that will record this microphone, and then when I'm done, it'll like name it Music Ed Tech Talk episode, and then put it in a folder or somewhere. So that's now automatable in that way. But I can't. All right, I'll get a clear concept for you, and then I'll write more specifically. All right, that's a really good one. So I usually also do an app and an album of the week. I'm using an app lately called Default Folder X, which I would like to recommend to anyone listening. It is a Mac app, and it does quite a lot of powerful things that help you to automate some very, very repetitive tasks that you might do when you're like clicking around and like organizing files in your file system. I'll tell you my favorite one, and it's going to sound so small, but it actually saves me a lot of headache. Sometimes I'm like in the Finder and I find a file or I find a folder that I want to work with. And then I'm in some app and I'm saving my work from an app. And the place I want to save the work is to the folder that I've just opened in the Finder. So one of my favorite features of Default Folder X is when you're looking and you're in the save, dialog box in an app, and you're choosing where you save your work, rather than like fiddling around and navigating to that same folder. It could be like multiple folders deep or in your Google Drive somewhere. What you can do is you can like hover your mouse over the spot on your computer screen where that Finder window is, even if it's like 7 windows buried in the background, and click on it, and then it'll make whatever your save dialog box, whatever folder it's looking at, it'll like bounce to whatever folder you've just clicked on in that Finder window.
Oh, that's cool.
It's pretty nice. Yeah. It does like lots of other things too. You can teach it to like say, if I'm saving work in this app, by default, always save all of my projects to this folder, or Here's my, you can save favorite folders. It's like kind of like a file-based automation tool.
Very cool.
I love it. I love it. Do you have any apps that are, you're certainly welcome to, some people feature their own, say their own app is the app of the week, which you're welcome to do.
No, that would be too obvious. The default, what was it called? Default Finder X?
Default Folder X is the
Default Folder X. Hey, that's one that my mum definitely wouldn't understand. File system. My app of the week would be, there's an app called Soulver. It's spelt Soulver, and it's actually an app. It's a math app, or maths, as we'd say in the UK. And this is it just gives you the ability to very quickly kind of set up calculations, or do quick kind of math things in a text-based way. So you can just, I mean, I know you can use Google for some of this stuff, but you can just say like, well, how many days since April 12th, 2004? And then change days to months, and set up a whole thing, and they can have variables and tokens and all of that kind of stuff. It's a pretty cool little app, very useful if you're needing to do some quick calculations. I'd recommend it.
I like it. It's kind of like halfway between a note app and an Excel spreadsheet to me, in a way where I don't want to be dealing with like the abstraction of like cells and all the the tools that are in the way. I just want to start like writing words, but then the numbers are live and then they calculate automatically. I've got my favorite one is I'm trying to find it here. I must have it in, I updated to Soulver 3, and I guess it hasn't been moved to Soulver 2 yet. Anyway, it's a pizza calculator. We often will travel on field trips or do performances on a bus, and we almost always will feed our students before we go. And our orchestra director has he's very methodical about this. He's figured out how to save the most amount of money and time by like what time of day relative to the buses leaving the school do you order it. We always go to Costco, and we have them like double cut each slice. And I just have like a lot of trouble with those logistics. So what I did was I had him write it out for me, and then I went into Soulver and I wrote a calculator basically in plain English that says like, okay, literally type number of kids attending, and then like, I don't know, like 120, cost per slice. And then I type the number of the slice. And then what happens is then, because of all the variables are automatically generating wherever I type numbers, every time we go on this trip, I can just change the number of how many students are attending, and it'll calculate the whole trip, like how much money we're going to spend at Costco, including like the current price of water bottle and like cookies, because we get those too. And he liked it so much that he bought Soulver. He was like, I gotta have that. And then he made it. He's like way better at this stuff than me. So then he made it better. He made the calculator better than mine. So there you go. Actually, it's
very cool.
Go ahead.
It's a very cool way of understanding, and also it's human readable, like you say. So anyone else can read it. It's not like an Excel spreadsheet way. It's sort of like anyone can read it. Your method, if you will.
Yeah, I used to have I'll just throw one more thing out there. I used to have a school I would work at where like whenever I would count money from a fundraiser, I would have to, I'd bring it to the secretary in the office, and as a young teacher, I just wasn't like doing the math right. She'd be really frustrated with my poor math. So I would like write it out. I would basically like write it like this name of kid and then the number of dollars they paid. And you could literally write out in natural English like 5 cents, and then it'll interpret that as 5 cents. It'll understand that that's like monetary. So and then I would just print it I would send it to PDF and email it to her before I would bring the money down to her office, and she'd say like, hey, all my work is right here if you want to pick it apart.
Yeah, it's great. It's the way our brain works, isn't it? When you ask the question, you don't want to then go, okay, now how am I going to put that into sort of a math form? You just ask the question and solve it, and it tells you the answer. It's great.
Exactly. Yeah, I love it. Well, I usually also do like sort of a music sharing every episode, and I'll just tell you, I'm listening to. I'm going to change my pick from what it was in the outline earlier, because I ended up using that on another recording. But I'm listening to, it's weird how the music industry is, how you can sort of see like how social media, particularly TikTok, is challenging things, because, I'm finding artists doing like really interesting things there. And then, of course, because if you're a good, if you're self-promoting yourself, you probably have like activity on all these different platforms. But for me, I'm seeing this one guy on TikTok. He's called Button Masher, and I'm just like, who is this guy? He's awesome. Every time his TikToks come up, it's like 30 seconds of him. He's sort of like done an arrangement of some like 90s era Sega Genesis thing, and he's like shredding jazz guitar over top of it. And I'm like, this guy is awesome. I only a few days ago was like, I wonder if he has a YouTube channel. He does. He has full arrangements of all these great like stuff from Street Fighter and like Sonic and I don't know. He like he arranges them with like lots of pretty dense jazz harmony. So it has
yeah.
But then like all the synth choices are like, really like true to the era of whatever kind of piece of music he's covering. Right. So he's really like quite good and doing cool things. So anyway, he's got some albums on all the streaming platforms. I'll link one in the show notes. Origin Story is the one that we're listening to, and it's cool. It's great. Like really really good arrangements of Sonic the Hedgehog and all my childhood favorites. So
awesome. I don't have anything as cool as that, I'm afraid. What am I listening to at the moment? I've kind of gone backwards a little bit. I'm listening to quite a lot of Medion, which is a French DJ. But I'm such a huge Prince fan. Basically, I have just the first few Prince albums just on my. I have a turntable with a vinyl player, and I just wear them out just time and time again. Let me go even more specific. Go and have a listen to "Feel for You." That's just such an amazing song by Prince. It's fantastic.
So, yeah, some closing thoughts about like what an educator, where they can learn more about StaffPad, and where they can go to learn more.
Absolutely. You can learn more about StaffPad at www.staffpad.net. That's our official website. Or head to the App Store on your iPad or Windows tablet and have a look at the pages there. There's also some great stuff on YouTube. Check out some of the YouTube tutorials, YouTube reviews, some of the content on StaffPad's YouTube page. In terms of how it might be useful in a music education context, I think that you can find your own benefit of it, some own workflows of it, but oftentimes I think it's very interesting to be able to demonstrate to people how a piece is put together. And one of the good things about StaffPad is the playback engine is quite realistic. So you can take a well-known piece, for example, and transcribe it or import it into StaffPad and then deconstruct how that was done. So some of the masters, you can take some of their work and just go, well, this is how he did it. Probably quite good to learn from this guy. He knew what he was doing. And get a real sense of being able to tune that inner ear through the enhanced playback and learn about timbre and color and all those kind of things that are not so easy to learn from a textbook.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we've been going a while. I don't want to keep you from your family, certainly, but I appreciate all this time that you've spent here with me today. It's awesome to meet you face to face, and I love the work you're doing and appreciate it very deeply.
Well, thank you so much. No, it's a pleasure to speak to you.
I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for the episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in the podcast app of your choice. You can now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week. Please rate and review this show in the podcast app. It absolutely helps. It'll take a second and just a few taps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about it. Learn more about my music and teaching career at robbyburns.com. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube at Robby Burns. Please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. All support tiers get perks, but even the base tier gets you a monthly video update with an app and music recommendation and some tech tips. Of course, also access to the Music Ed Tech Talk Discord community where you can chat with other supporters and guests of the show about music, apps, pedagogy, lesson ideas, tech support, and more. It's a fun place to be, and I hope to connect with you soon. Thanks to this week's sponsor, Scale Exercise Play Along Tracks. Be sure to check it out, and see you next time. With me today is David William Hearn, here to talk all about StaffPad.